menti.com. You can do it from mobile also. Enter the code that is mentioned on the screen, or you can do the QR code scanning as well. Yes, I can see responses are coming. Responses have started coming in. Very good. I'll give you 2-3 minutes. I can see responses are coming in. I request all of you to complete this task, please. Excellent. I have received 44 responses. I will give 1 more minute. Excellent. So 80 plus people have answered, and still the answers are coming in. As we can see, most of us relate ourselves when we say agile to scrum, to sprint, product backlog, scrum master, kanban. So these are the very common terminologies and the words and practices. I can see daily stand up, I can see refinement, project management, testing, software development, sprint planning, sprint backlog, CI/CD. Okay, so many of these words are what we are relating to when we are saying agile. Right, all these words come to our mind, and you might be already working on agile projects, and agile is now kind of our way of working. So as we can see here, I'm not going to go much into all these words because that is what the agile methodology is. Our main focus will be on talking on testing part of it. So yes, agile scrum is the most popular methodology, as we know. Product backlog is what we develop. We have retrospective meetings, we have stories. We want to be flexible. I can see so many words, and most of these words are commonly we are relating to when we are thinking about agile. So thanks for your participation. Let me go back to the slide deck. Excellent. So as we all know, when we are saying about agile, right? We all are familiar about the principles of this. That is the agile manifesto. right? The Agile Manifesto, which was published in 2001 by all the people who were party to the development of these kind of methodologies, right? All these 17 signatories were working on different agile practices, and then they publish this manifesto which talks about, the values of entire agile methodology, right? It talks about how individuals and interactions are important, how working software is important, how collaborating with customer is important, how responding to changes is important, right? So it is a new way of better way of developing software. And now as we see, nowadays most of the projects are following this methodology, and many of us are in the projects where either Scrum is followed or some other technology, a methodology framework is followed. So we all have seen this very common and funny picture where we are talking about, meeting the requirements of the customer, and then thinking about, what customer wanted and what is our solution. So at the end, if we deliver a product to the customer which might be meeting all the requirements but which may not meet the need of the customer, that situation we don't want to go. And that's why Agile thinks about delivering value to the customer by understanding the real needs, by doing the incremental deliveries to ensure that our understanding and customers requirements are in sync, right? So we don't want to end up in a situation where we are not really understanding what customer had expected and still we are meeting the requirements. So going beyond requirements, understanding the needs of the customer, that is the real basis of implementing agile. And meeting requirements, obviously the requirements are not frozen, and that's why agile practices are implemented. If all the requirements are purely known, if the technology is set, no one will go for the agile methodology. Agile methodology will work when the requirements are still in the discovery phase. The requirements are still getting evolved, right? The technology that we want to use is not very stable. And then the agile practices will help you to build a product incrementally by understanding the requirements that are continuously changing, right? That's why typically in those scenarios, agile practices are followed. And now, when we are talking about agile, as you have already talked, you have also have shared, there are so many frameworks and practices that are used, right? We have agile scrum framework where we are working in sprints. We have product backlog. That entire team is working with, daily stand-up meetings are there. We are creating the sprint backlog, so on and so forth. There is extreme programming methodology, which gives more focus on the practices that need to be followed by the agile teams, like continuous feedback, stand up meetings, pair programming, unit testing, all such practices, test driven development are, kind of prescribed by extreme programming techniques. We have Kanban methodology, which focuses on the lean aspects of project management to focus on reducing the waste, right? And ensuring that each item moves from backlog to the done as fast as possible. When we are talking about expanding our agile practices beyond team, at business level, at organization level, we have the frameworks like SAFe, Disciplined Agile, which talk about how we can achieve the agility at the business level, right? So there are many frameworks available. As we can see, most popularly, Scrum is what is followed, and many practices from extreme programming and Kanban are used as part of the, even in the Scrum methodologies, they are kind of, added or enhanced into that. At organizational level, we can see many business agility level type of principles and practices are followed. Ultimately, when we are talking about being agile, we are talking about, am I responsive as a team? Are we adaptive to the changes that are continuously coming? Is our team continuously learning and improving? And are we self managed? Those are the core principles of being agile, as we all are aware of, right? So now, when we are talking about testing in these agile projects or testing in this agile environment, we are trying to, ask some questions to ourselves. When we are talking about agile, it is continuous deliveries. The requirements are continuously changing. Customers are asking for different features at different moments. In this case, is testing really required? We are developing a very small piece of work in one iteration. Why to do testing? Is it really required? If it is required, why so much? There is a discussion and there are practices and everything about in Agile. How it is different. What is so different in Agile that we need to really discuss, right? Is it only developer doing testing? Because we see the Scrum talks about development team. Everywhere there is a mention of development team, right? Hello? Hello? Somebody said something? Am I audible, team?
Yes, you can
Okay,
go
okay,
ahead.
I'll move ahead.
Yes.
Maybe, yeah. Right, right. Then we also need to ask, when to do testing. Do we have really time? We are talking about 2 weeks window. In most of the Scrum projects, the sprint will be of 2 weeks duration. If at all we need to do within those 2 weeks, how to do this testing? How our testing teams should be organized. Should they be sitting with the developers? Should we have separate testing team? What are the advantage? What are the challenges? What about documentation? We were used to writing a lot of test cases. Are we going to continue the same in the agile projects? You know, as a as an individual person, how I can become a good tester and contribute into agile framework, right? Contribute best into my project. These are different aspects that we would try to understand, and we will try to give some answers to these essential questions that we are talking about. So when we say, is testing really needed? Yes, absolutely it is needed, right? When you talk about Agile Manifesto, the Agile Manifesto has couple of very important values that it talks about, right? It says that we have to deliver working software frequently. Now, working software is very important. A software needs to work. A software needs to meet the expectations of the customer. Who will confirm that it is working, right? The developers are having the ownership of building the product, but who will confirm that yes, it is a working software, right? Obviously, testing team. Another important value from manifesto of Agile is you need to provide rapid feedback to development team. Rapid, continuous, quick feedback to the development team. Now, the customers, yes, they are involved. There is a collaboration, but on a daily basis, even within a day, multiple times, who is going to provide the rapid feedback to the development team? Obviously, it is we testers, right? So, is testing really needed? Absolutely, it is needed. It is embedded in the manifesto of Agile, right? To deliver the working software, to provide the rapid feedback, testing is definitely essential. Now, typically why there is, sometimes people ask, what to do in testing. Because if we go into the Scrum practices, we may find that, the entire Scrum guide does not talk specifically about testing. It does not have specific guidelines on what and how testing should be done. But extreme programming has few definitely good guidelines. And then we can always use the best practices adapted to the agile values. And that's why, when we go through the Scrum guide, when we understand the entire Scrum process, sometimes we as a testers find it difficult to place ourselves there. Where am I? What I would be doing in this entire practice. Okay, so that is what we are trying to understand through this some activities, right? So now, when we are saying testing, testing is testing, right? Whatever it is a testing to ensure that application is of good quality. We are giving confidence to the customer that yes, we have checked. Then what is so different in Agile, right? Typically, the most important aspect of Agile testing is, and it is what is required, is involvement from day one. The knowledge of the tester is at par with the developer. We are involved right from day one in the project, and that's why we are ensuring that right from the smallest piece of information in the project is aware, we are aware of, right? So involvement of tester from day one is the most essential aspect of agile testing. When developer starts developing, the tester is involved and he starts contributing. Now on day one, when something is not ready, what is the role of tester that we are looking at, right? We are looking at participation in the refinement of the requirements. Now, many of you have given user story as the very popular terminology that we associate with, right? A user story is it evolves over the period, as we all know, right? We call it as backlog refinement. The product owner will be adding, more and more and more details into the user story. Now, we as a testing team, we are having our own perspective, and we would be ensuring that we are asking as many questions as possible, and we are participating in the refinement of requirements. We are asking, okay, what if, what that, take an example that there is a simple, requirement or user story about adding an item to wish list, right? So there is a user story that as a shopper, I want to add item in the wish list. Now, when this story is getting elaborated, we can think in the future and ask lot of questions to refine these requirements. For example, how many items can I add in the wish list? If the item goes out of stock, will the wish list item get deleted? Right? Yeah. How can I retrieve my wish list? Can the wish list remain forever? Is there any upper end that okay, after 6 months automatically the products will get removed from the wish list? So what I'm trying to tell here is it is extremely important for us to ask as many questions so that different aspects of the requirements are clarified. Now this is the most important role of the tester in the early phases of the project. What is different in Agile is a tester will always be happy when he finds defect, but in Agile, we will get more credit if we are preventing defects. If we are identifying issues in the requirements early, if we are working with developer and making all our cards open, look, this is what I'm going to test. So that if those things, those error scenarios, those negative scenarios, if the test developer has not thought about, he will ensure that he is putting those in his code. So preventing defects is better always than finding defects, because finding defects during testing is very costly affair, right? It needs setting up of test environment, finding lot of defects, doing retesting, regression testing, making different builds. So if we participate in preventing the defects, that is the best contribution from testers perspective. Testing is not one-time activity in Agile. Start testing early and test often. Continuous testing. If we are talking about a Scrum practice where we are having 2 to 3 weeks window, every day kind of we are busy in doing testing. So continuously testing will ensure that we are giving a stable product in the deployment. Testing is not only from the user UI, right? That is the very important aspect and change. We are involved in testing at code level. We are involved in testing at database level. We are involved in testing at API level. So there is no layer in the system where we will not be involved, right? In earlier days, the tester will have only knowledge about the entire application as it is seen to the user. Okay, but the inside layers we were not familiar. And here is now a change. We have to be doing testing across multiple layers of the system, right from database, right from APIs, even at code level, we will have to do testing. As I said, we will have to think about the needs of the customer rather than the written requirements. Because as we all know, testing manifesto tells less lightweight documentation, right? Requirements may not be totally clearly defined, but we need to ask questions about what is the need of the customer, and that's what it is. Collaboration is the key. We cannot sit differently, aloof. We have to be continuously interacting. We have to ask questions. We have to contribute with the development team, right? We can also do lot of automation testing. Testing automation is the key. Manual testing is mainly done to use your experience to think about the defects. Their manual testing is more required. But otherwise, most of the testing is automated, right? We need to be very strong in the technical and automation background. Risk-based testing is extremely important because we cannot test everything within that small period of time. We have to give focus on what is most important to the customer. What is the most value driven aspect here, right? Give more weightage to those risky areas and give less weightage to the less risky areas. And obviously, we as testers are going to work as the quality coaches within the team. We need to emphasize what is the importance of the quality, what is the importance of ensuring quality within that team. So we have to be guiding our development team about the quality processes that we need to follow. So these are few things that are definitely seen as different in the agile environment, right? So is it that all testing is done by us? No. As we see that there is a shift left approach. Shift left means start early, right? So typically developers are also involved in testing. It is expected that unit testing should be done as much as by developers, but in agile we cannot just say that only developers will do it. We as testers need to be equipped with unit testing techniques, using testing frameworks. That is what we need to gear up ourselves to contribute better into the agile projects. API level testing, UI verification typically will be done by tester. The lower level of integration will be done by developer. Higher level of integration can be done by tester. User story testing, feature acceptance testing, functional, non-functional testing will be done by testers. And obviously, the final acceptance before deployment will be done by customer. So testing is not only the responsibility of tester, but it is a joint responsibility. But we as a testing team are going to be the key people in driving this activity. It's a continuous testing. Every new code, every new build, every new deployment has to be tested thoroughly, right? To ensure that we are not having any issues in the production. Okay, fine. We understand that we want to do testing. We understand that many people are involved in testing. But do we really have testing time to do all this, right? How we should focus, how we should plan. There are so many things to do, and how to do is a big question, right? So typically, if we think as a testing team, what we can, what we can check is, okay, typically there will be iterations. In the early iterations, there will be the key important features that will get deployed, which may not be, sorry, will get developed, which may not be deployed to the customer. For example, you are developing some business logic, you are developing some UI related, pilots. So in every iteration, we need to ensure that we are involved in doing the testing which is focused for that iteration scope, right? So there will be typically unit testing that we will be doing with developer prior to committing the code. There will be API testing that we will be involved in. We will need to check the business logic verification. Once the build is done by the developer, we will have to do the build verification testing, smoke testing, to ensure that the build is not failing. A story which is getting completed within that iteration, we will need to ensure that the acceptance based criteria based testing is done for that story. If there is a UI involved, we have to do the testing through UI as well as the usability aspect of it. And very important, we have to do the regression testing for the earlier sprints functionality that is delivered, right? And on top of that, lot of exploratory experience driven testing needs to be done to find as many defects as possible which are still remaining in our code, right? So all these have to be done on a continuous basis in every sprint. At the end of the sprint, there will be a demonstration of the completed features. We will get feedback. We will get, maybe some issues also from customer or product owner. Now, as a testing team, we need to do a little bit analysis of those, So what during our retrospective meetings, why those issues we could not find, right? So they call it something called as 5 why analysis, right? 5 why analysis. We need to ask a question to ourselves as part of our retrospective. The feedback that we received in the sprint end review, how we could have found it, why we missed that. Was it a limitation on our environment? Is it that we did not understand the requirement properly? Is it that we skipped some testing because we did not think it is a value to do this testing? So where exactly we went wrong? right? So that kind of 5 why analysis we should be doing during the end review, whatever feedback we are getting at the end of the review meeting from the customers and product owners, and analyze that in the retrospective and improve, on the in the future sprints. Now, it is, as I said, if we are working in the sprints, right? For example, there is sprint 1, sprint 2, sprint 3. In the early sprints, there may not be something that can be deployed to the production environment, right? Because we are still developing small stories here. They cannot stand on their own and they cannot be deployed. But during the intermediate release, for example, at the end of release sprint 3, we may have a deployable feature, right? A feature can be a combination of multiple stories. The multiple stories can be integrated together, and that feature can stand on its own and can be deployed in the live environment. So we need to identify, as part of our sprint planning, that okay, at what point of time a deployable feature is going to be available. And there, the end-to-end integration testing as well as verification of the entire feature needs to be done on top of what we are doing here, right? Because now we have a deployable feature available. We need to now think from the perspective of users. It is kind of acceptance testing done by us, right? Is this feature working as per the expectations of user? Is it giving the benefit that users are going to expect, customer is going to expect? So that kind of focus should be given on the sprints where you are going to have a deployment. And then as we move ahead, as we reach near our release dates, the last sprints, maybe last 2 or 3 sprints, our entire system, which we are going to deploy as part of the release, is almost ready, right? Now here we can give lot of focus on non-functional testing also, right? The performance testing, security testing, compatibility testing, acceptance, usability testing, and also the user acceptance testing of the features that are going to get released in that particular release. So towards late sprint, more focus on non-functional testing needs to be provided on top of what we are already doing. And obviously, throughout all these phases, regression testing is what we will be doing, because we cannot afford to have a failure in something that is already shown or deployed to the customer, right? Now, this is a very interesting slide, I would say. Uh, they call it as testing quadrants. Okay. Mary Bryan was the person who created this. He's an expert who created this quadrant. Now, this quadrant is telling us all the aspects of different levels of testing, different types of testing that we should be thinking as part of our agile projects, right? And it not only tells us what to do, it also tells us why. Okay, why we are doing something. So let us try to understand this, because this is really interesting and it really gives us a good picture about we as a tester in agile, why we are doing some kind of testing and how it should be done. Okay? Now, what they are saying here is there are two important aspects here. One is what is the focus of our testing, right? Why we are doing testing. So please understand, because Agile is a collaborative way of development, in the early stages, our objective of testing is to support development. We are helping development team to build a good product. Okay, we are helping development team to ensure that they are preventing the errors, they are preventing the defects, they are making a good product. So one focus of testing is supporting the development. Once the development reaches to certain maturity point, then our focus changes, right? Then our focus changes and our focus becomes criticizing the solution that is getting developed. Now here our focus will be more on finding the issues. Here our focus will be to ensure that there are no problems in the application that we are going to deploy. Okay, so here we are not supporting development, but we are supporting development in the earlier stages. Another way of looking into testing is, what is our, what is the testing that we are doing? Are we checking the technology, or are we checking the way the the code is developed, or are we checking the business angle of that? For example, is my API giving the correct response code, whatever I am expecting, 200, 500, etc.? Is a technology facing testing, right? Am I able to add item in the wish list? Is a business facing testing. So what is my focus here? What is my focus? Am I focusing to check whether the technology that is used to develop this application is correctly working? Is it supporting the needs of this application? Or is my focus on checking that the business is getting what they are expecting, right? So now please see here. The quadrants that they have defined is an intersection of what is my, why I am testing and what is my focus. So in the early stages, when the development is still going on, right, we are not criticizing what they have done. We are ensuring that we are supporting the development process to do a better testing, right? To do a better code development. And that's why it is an early stage. Our focus is also on technology. The technology that is being used to write a certain program, to write certain API call, to implement some database structure. Is it correctly working or not? Are there any issues? So at that time, our focus should be on the elements of our individual system. We can think about smallest pieces of units. We can think about the components, individual components in our application, and test. We can implement the test first code later approach. Create test cases first, test driven development. Create test cases first and let help developer to develop the code to meet these test cases. So developers burden of meeting the requirements is shared by the testers. We are creating all the test cases for that unit and identifying all the possible error scenarios that are to be handled in that piece of code, right? All the variety that needs to be addressed, variety of data that needs to be addressed in that particular piece of code. And we are creating our test cases and giving them to developer. We are helping developer to ensure that he is not missing on any particular combination of data, any particular variety of data. So our focus is to support developer and to ensure that the technology aspects that he is implementing are working correctly. So, and typically to have a better testing, to have quick testing, to give rapid feedback, these test cases need to be automated. So that's why in Agile, as we see, lot of focus is given on automating the unit test cases, automating the API test cases, right? Automating the early test cases so as we are confirming that the technology that we are using is correct, and we are ensuring that we are supporting the development team to come up with the best code, and we are providing feedback as fast as possible, right? So that is what they are talking about, this quadrant one. Now as we move ahead, the small units are now combined into stories. The stories are combined into features. Now here, individual stories, individual features are ready, right? Once the story is ready, that means a user can use that feature, user can use that particular functionality. So now the technology is already set. We will have a focus on looking from the perspective of business, looking from the perspective of end user. Now we are not validating whether the technology is working fine. We are validating whether the users will be able to use these features correctly or not, right? So at a story level, at a feature level, again, we are supporting the developer by ensuring that again we are implementing the approach of behavior driven development or acceptance test driven development, where for the entire user story, we are creating the test cases based on the acceptance criteria. What users are what users are expecting from this story, right? It's a simple module of authentication that the developers are implementing. What are different acceptance criteria? Create all the test cases based on the acceptance criteria from the perspective of business. You know what happens when valid credentials are entered? What happens when invalid credentials are entered? Is there a specific rule for password? Is the, is the account getting locked after certain uh, uh, number of invalid attempts? Do we need to provide a fee functionality of, forgetting password, retrieving password, changing password? All such acceptance related features, test cases should be thought, and we need to tell developer, look, this is what the business is expecting, and all these things need to be there in that particular story or feature. So we are supporting developer, but now our approach is thinking from the perspective of business. So this, at this level, as I told you, when the story or feature is ready, we are going to do the acceptance test driven development or behavior driven development, where we are thinking what will be the acceptance criteria of the user and ensure that developer is implementing all those aspects in the code. Again, this many cases can be automated at these stages. Some test cases can also be manual. Now we are moving ahead, right? Our many stories are ready, many features are ready. We are reaching the, kind of deployment time, as I told you, towards the late stages. Now here, when we are reaching the late stages, again, from the business perspective, we need to check whether the end-to-end scenario, is it working correctly? There are many stories related to wish list, many stories related to purchase. But now in the real life, we are thinking about the end-to-end scenario of a user. How he will check out with multiple payment options, how he will do the end-to-end purchase, how many different types of users are involved, and how their work is interacting with each other. So here we are trying to think about the validation. This is more about verification. Verification is meeting the requirements. Now, validation is thinking from the real life perspective, thinking from the real operational environment perspective, acceptance perspective. And that will be typically manual. Here, we will be involving the users also. They can be part of alpha testing, beta testing. We will think as if we are the user. The persona analysis and other activities will help us to think like user. What will be the operational environment? Think about that. I'm testing some medical device. For that device, as a tester, I might be sitting on my desktop and looking at the screen. But in the real life, suppose that device is used in the ICU, the nurse will be at 6 feet distance from that device. Will she be able to view how she will respond from that? She will be in the environment where a lot of patients she needs to handle. So we need to think about the real life scenario, real life data, and we will validate from the perspective of the real usage. And obviously we need to involve users also to do the alpha and beta testing. This testing we are doing from the business perspective, what is required by the business. But at the same time, we also need to validate that when this entire system is ready, are we getting the quality characteristics of the system? Is this system efficient? Is this system secure? Is it can it be can it be ported on multiple platforms? Can it be installed properly? Can it be deployed properly? So a lot of non-functional quality characteristics need to be present in that system along with the functionality. Here we are giving more perspective from the business functions, but the system internally needs to be competent technically to ensure that it is working correctly in the live environment, right? When 1,000 users are simultaneously working on the system, the response time, the memory utilization, the CPU utilization is correct. So what we need to do, we need to ensure that from the technology perspective, again, now we need to focus, and is this technology that is implemented, is it really working? Is it really correct in the live to be used in the production environment, right? Does it support performance requirements? Does it support the security requirements? Does it support the installation and portability compatibility requirements? If there is a failure in the server, how quickly the system can be recovered, right? How it can be recovered from the disaster? Can we take a backup and restore that from the backup database? So here our objective is to criticize the system from the technology perspective, But now we are not talking about a single program. We are talking about the entire system at a glance, right? And that is where we will use lot of tools to do the performance testing, security testing, etc. Right? So this quadrant will help us to understand, what is our role in working, why we are doing, and what should be our focus, what should be the methodology that we will be using. Does it make sense, team? This quadrant is very interesting and I find it very interesting. What do you think? If this gives us a way of looking into why and what of our testing, why
Correct.
we are doing, what should be our approach. Should we do the test driven development, should we do uh, the automated testing, manual testing, why? That gives us some insight. If you think that makes sense to you, kindly raise your hand. You can use the raise hand button, right? Yeah. So it really gives you a better insight into uh, thinking about why and what of testing, right? Thank you so much, team. Thank you. Right. But does it mean that, in Agile, we say it is very dynamic, we need to be responsive, it is always changing? Does it mean that we as a testers need not do any planning, right? We as a lead in the testing team should not be doing any planning. No, it is definitely not true. As we know, the entire product is delivered into multiple releases, right? And within every release, there are multiple iterations. So we as a tester, we as a lead of the tester need to think about, what is my role in this entire planning? The product owner, the scrum master, the development team, everybody will be involved in doing the release planning. And we need to be actively participating in doing the quality risk analysis. Quality risk analysis is where what can go wrong in this product, right? From the functionality perspective, from the non functional perspective, identify all the possible risks and define our testing approach so that those risks are not coming. If performance is a risk, give more focus on performance, right? We need to identify the goals of testing. We need to identify levels, types of testing. We are going to have the organization of our team. Would our team be working with the developers? Would they be outside? Do we need to have a dedicated test lead? All those aspects need to be planned during the release planning. Skills of testing team, what tools we will be required, what environment, how is there going to be an automated setup of the environment, how the deployment should occur, how the configuration management of our testing activity should be done. All these aspects have to be thought in the beginning of the release, because in the beginning of the release we know, what are the features that we are going to deliver in this release. So some features may need some specific type of testing. You might be doing some security testing for that particular release. It may not be required for some other release. So we need to do a thorough planning about tools, about configuration management, about defect management during the early phases of the release. As every iteration starts, we need to be again involved in identifying the functional and non-functional aspects for that user story. How much task, what is the estimate of the task for our testing activities? We need to create a sprint backlog for our testing activities also. We are dividing our user story into different tasks that are related to the testing, right? You may have data creation, you may have automation task, you may have some task of retesting the defects from the earlier sprint. You may have a task of setting up a test environment to do multiple compatibility testing, multiple environments you need to set. And for each of these tasks we will need to estimate our effort. And whenever the user story effort estimation is done, we have to contribute from our perspective also. If we are following planning poker or any kind of estimation technique, from testing perspective, how much complexity we are looking for this story. It may happen that sometimes some stories are very easy to implement, but they are difficult to test. You need different kind of data to be created. You need a specific setup to be done. So as a tester, I need to be confirming during the iteration planning that yes, see, even though this story is simple for you, you are sizing it as small, but from testing perspective, it is quite complex. So when we are talking about the overall story estimation, the testing efforts also need to be considered in that estimation, right? And that is very important role. Otherwise, development team can commit to lot of stories because there is a less work for development. But as a testing team, we will not be able to keep our pace with them. And for that, our estimation, our contribution into the story estimation is extremely crucial. Dependencies and sequencing is another important aspect that we need to be discussing during the early sprint meeting. uh, Typically the developers will develop based on their own ways, or whatever is the logical way of development for them, but that may not be suitable for us to do the testing. Okay, we will need to identify the correct sequence. We will need to make developers aware that what should be the correct sequence of development that will help us do better testing, early testing, and provide proper feedback, right? So, and then we also need to contribute in telling which is the most important part here. We should not just think about the peripheral items, but what is the core part of this iteration, and can we get that core feature to do testing early? That is what we should be emphasizing during the sprint planning meeting. So planning is definitely important, as we saw. Now, again, the another important aspect of how to do testing is managing regression risks. As we can see that in Agile, typically testing efforts are significant. And why they are significant? Because in Agile, with every iteration, we are adding more and more code. That means we are touching the existing code base, right? And the existing code base increases in every iteration. And there is always a continuous code churn that is happening, and that's why there is a possibility of introducing regression weakness in the system. We cannot afford to have failure in what was working in the earlier iteration and now it is failing here. That we cannot afford. And hence, in Agile, with every iteration, the extent of regression testing continuously increases. We need to include all the critical features, all the critical stories that were developed in the earlier iterations as part of our regression, right? We want to maintain the velocity. We cannot, so, and that's why we need to do the automation of that. This, we can see here that in iteration 5, we need to do the regression testing of this much code that is churned out in the earlier 4 iterations. Plus, we need to do the fresh testing of the additional code. Now, how can we maintain our velocity? How we can we complete all this work within that short period of time? So there is no question that we have to do the automation, right? Unless we do automation, we will not be able to justify, we will not be able to complete our work within that period of time. It is quite possible that we skip some regression, and then that's why the something that was working in the earlier iteration may fail in the later iteration. So we want to reduce this entire technical debt. We want to maintain our velocity. We want to reduce the regression risk. And very important, we need to quickly provide feedback to the development team about product quality. And that's why always regression test cases are automated as we move ahead. And that is the very uh, you know uh, typical characteristic of agile project. Regression test cases need to be identified right from iteration 1, and they have to be converted into automated script as we move ahead. Otherwise, a time will come that there are only 2 weeks and there are huge things that need to be tested, and we just cannot do that. Okay, to avoid such situation, always automation needs to be implemented. And that's why not only for automation, but extensive usage of tools is the key characteristic of Agile as we see. We want to maintain velocity. We want to provide rapid feedback, as I have already mentioned. So unit testing frameworks, can we do manual unit testing? May not be possible. If there is a Java code, if there is any Android code, can we implement JUnit? Can we quickly run the test cases using JUnit framework? With the JUnit, can we have certain plugin which will also check the code coverage at the backend? Right? Are we testing 100% code? Now, it all depends on the risk that is there. Right? If we are working in some regulatory domain, if we are developing a very safety critical product, then the code coverage needs to be 100%. Every line that is written in the program needs to be executed and tested. We don't want any surprises at the end, right? So code coverage analysis tools need to be implemented as part of our agile projects, right? Every new piece of code that we are adding should get executed. So that can be tracked. We can have plugins which will monitor in the background, okay, how much code is tested. If we are not able to achieve 100%, then some white box testing methodologies might need to be implemented. We need to look into the code and identify which lines are not getting executed through black box testing. And we will need to, create some test cases looking at the code at a unit testing level to ensure that every line is tested. API. Now, this is very important because most of the applications nowadays are having service layers, right? So, without service layer, now many applications are not present. So, you have multiple services. Typically, whatever data that is displayed on the UI or on mobile is fetched through some API calls. And typically, when we are working in agile environment, early stages only APIs will be developed, right? In later stages, so this is API developed. Later stages, UI will be developed. And then maybe in certain cases, this API will be integrated with UI. So there will not be the entire functionality available in the early sprints, which we can test through user interface. We will have to ensure that the API calls in the background are working correct, right? So API testing needs to be done continuously, and that's why we will be using multiple tools like SOAP UI or many other tools which can be even through Postman. We can do some automation, and we will run our API testing as much as possible. UI driven functional automation, which has to be done as part of regression. We can also add these test cases as part of continuous integration. Selenium, UFT, Tosca, so many tools, right? Can be used to do the automation through the UI. We might be doing some exploratory testing because we do not have the clarity about requirements. Whenever the application we receive, new changes are implemented, we will just explore what changes are and we will take a call on that time itself. Okay, I need to test this, I need to test that. We can do recording of such sessions, so there are record capture tools available so that the knowledge is not wasted. Whatever I thought runtime, I'm recording it, and then those recorded scripts can be converted into a detailed test cases later. Sometimes we will need to do lot of test data creation. For that, testing tools will be useful. CI/CD pipe, sorry, CI/CD it should be. CI/CD pipeline, continuous integration, continuous deployment is typically achieved through the tools like Jenkins and others. How we can integrate our test cases into that tool, how we can link our test cases to the build verification. So for that, again, we will need to use tools. Non-functional testing tools will be required. Task tracking, we can use tools like Jira to do the tracking of our tasks that are part of the sprint. Every defect that we will be logging in. Even though we are saying it's an informal way of working, still the defect data needs to be uploaded, which will, because if some defects are not resolved, you need to move them back to the product backlog, right? So defects need to be tracked. Configuration management of our automation script. So we might want to use GitHub to, upload our scripts to the central repository and keep the recording tracking of our version. So usage of tools is inevitable, and we need to equip ourselves to learn many tools in a very short duration of time and keep us updated with the current trends. Right? That is very important. Even for that matter, lot of collaboration tools are also used. We are creating something, there is a retrospective meeting and all action items are created in some tools like Miro. There are, the workflows are created, and then some discussions happen somewhere in some collaboration tools. SharePoint is used to, just quickly do some add some notes related to some feature. We need to make ourselves familiar with all these tools and use them extensively. But obviously, tools are kind of, help to us. We need to develop our mindset about thinking about defects. If we don't develop that mindset, tools are not going to be contributing to that extent. Continuous integration is the kind of, heart of the many agile projects. We know that these continuous integration processes are typically set up as part of the entire pipeline. Tools like Jenkins are used, which are continuously polling the version controls. For example, you are having Git as your version control repository. Whenever developers are doing commit to the version control, the CI tools like Jenkins will be pulling continuously the latest committed, and the builds will get developed, builds will get created, and after every build is created, typically we will be executing our regression test suite. So that we will configure, that pipeline where after the development project build is done, then there will in the pipeline we will have the build for our automated scripts, right? So as soon as the development build works is ready, immediately we will attach a next object in the pipeline that run our regression test cases for Selenium, Tosca, whatever tool we are using, right? Because there is a continuous integration, every day a new build is generated. We need to ensure that every day we are testing that this build is not failing, right? The new features that are added, the new code that is added in this build is stable. So it is very essential to ensure that we are having our regression suite, which can include the unit test cases or integration test cases attached to the build verification. So this is, and this, for that we need to typically understand how the continuous integration tools work, how we can add our automation test cases as part of the CI/CD pipeline. So that needs to be understood, right? We need to ensure that uh, there are different sets for daily and nightly builds. Typically, daily builds, developers may create small commits, and then at the end, there will be a large build that will get generated. So you can have smaller pieces of automation during day builds and major regression during nightly builds, right? It is possible that we are having more and more code level tests, which will ensure that faster regression is completed, right? UI automation may take little more time to execute than the code level automation, right? We can also think about how we can give flexibility to developers, to select the test cases based on the areas that they have changed. So when we are creating the entire automation framework, we should be thinking about all these, how we can split our test cases, how we can customize our test cases to run in different cycles in a different manner, right? Can we have small chunks of different test suites which we can run through parallel, from the remote environments, from the on the cloud, through different agents? Parallel testing can we do so that we will be able to test on multiple environments, and at the same time, because of the parallel testing, we will be able to reduce our amount of time in testing. All those aspects are very essential to think when we are doing the automation and linking it with the continuous integration. And this is very, very specific to Agile, right? Because this kind of daily builds, this kind of, twice a day builds is not happening when we are working on the non-Agile kind of projects, right? Fine. We need to do all these things. But how our, typically this is what happens, how our testing team should be. Should we be working with developers and should we be the part of the development team, or should testing be separate? Is there a need of a separate test lead, test manager? Now, all these questions can be answered relatively based on the context of our project, right? Typically, what happens is the agile or scrum, as you say, it supports the whole team concept or power of three. They say that developer, tester, and product owner, the representative of customer, they should be together and they should be contributing in every feature development. Now, if we are not part of the development team, we will not be able to contribute into the requirements effectively. We will not be able to prevent defects effectively. So it is always recommended that the testers need to be part of the development team. It ensures early engagement. It ensures that The developers are getting different perspective, right? Preventing defects. But at the same time, there are some challenges also. You know, we get kind of, we develop bias same as the developers. Whatever developers think, we also start thinking like that. The developers get more kind of, what I would say, uh, they will get more preference in overall schedule. It may happen sometimes. We will lose our independence. We will start thinking like developers, right? There is lot of, regression automation burden will come on our head, and we will have to do lot of activities as part of that team, right? So there are advantages that yes, we will be able to contribute, but at the same time, the testing may take a sideline, less importance given to testing. Such kind of challenges can happen. So typically, that's why many of the agile experts suggest a hybrid model. What is hybrid model? We need to have two testing teams, right? One set of testers will be part of the development team or part of that agile team who is developing, right? So the testing of that particular sprint, the story that is getting developed in that sprint, the unit testing should be done by those testers who are working with developers. This way, we will retain the advantages of the whole team, but at the same time, there is not too much burden on the testers, and testers do not lose their independence. For that, we will have a separate team who is focused on the system level testing, independent testing. Now we are not, our objective is to only find defects. The testing team, so there are two teams as I was telling. One team is the part of the overall development team, who will be contributing into requirements, who will be preventing defects, who will be doing the continuous testing as we move ahead. And another team will be the independent team who would think about finding defects, who would do the automation which can be used by this team. They will do the automation, and this can be used by this team to do the execution. This independent team can focus on security testing, performance testing, which needs altogether a different setup, different mindset, right? So typically, two teams in a hybrid model is always beneficial. The testing team totally separate from development team is not a very recommended approach, because that impacts the core values of agile, right? So that is how we can have a separate team. Typically, it also depends on whether the agile teams, the way our organization has agile teams, are they component teams or are they feature teams, right? Component teams means they are the developers who are developing some reusable components for the product. For example, error logging framework, the sets of APIs which are continuously used, the UI that they are, typical UI components that they are developing, which can be consumed by all other development teams who are developing that product. So if we are part of such component team, then obviously we need to have more focus on the technology, right? That because suppose they are creating some error logging framework, we will have to do a lot of unit testing at that. They are creating the API, we will have to do a lot of testing, right? So a technology focus would be required for the teams who are working in the component teams. But our organization, if it is working in a feature driven teams, it's not that they are not creating separate components, but every development team is working on different features. Then here our more focus will be to think from the business perspective, think as a, think more on the functionality. End to end testing skills will be more required. So again, depending on our organization, our skills will change based on what type of team we are working in. But in any case, there are always some risks. As I told you, we may there is a chance to lose tester mindset. Tester should always think about defect. Tester should always think about breaking the code. But if we are too much working with developers, we may lose our mindset, and we need to clearly keep track of that. Am I losing? Am I getting carried away by what developers are saying, or am I really thinking about defects? Am I really contributing to break the system? Right? We may become tolerant about low quality practices sometimes, because we understand that they are so busy, the developers are busy, they do not have time, and we start accepting the poor quality processes. We become silent. right? That we need to keep our conscious continuously awake to avoid such practices. Most common challenge is we cannot keep pace with the changes. We do some testing, suddenly new bill comes in. Okay, other something new has changed there. We will have to do the regression again. So this daily basis, the changes are coming up. We may get sometimes overloaded. We may not feel productive because we are doing the same thing again and again. And for that, as I told you, we need to have a clear objective, what we want to achieve in this sprint, and how we can minimize our efforts by converting most of the test cases into automated. Right? So even though continuous changes come, I will give focus on only what is changed. For all unchanged area, let the automation suite take care of itself in the nightly runs. Now, typical question, what about documentation? Do we need to write detailed test cases? Do we need to write click by click, step by step test cases? No, not required. Because Agile Manifesto focuses on lightweight documentation, right? Typically, it's very less time gap is there when we create test cases and when we execute, right? It's not that we have created test cases 2 months back and now we are executing, so we don't remember what we have written. No, you are creating on Monday and executing on Wednesday, right? So no detailed documentation is necessary. We can use, we can create high level scenarios or low level scenarios. We can write the data, we can create data sheets only so that all the combinations can be tested. Typically, we should always focus on minimal maintenance of the test cases, right? The automation scripts that we are creating can become the documentation itself, right? So less and less documentation is advised. We can use mind map techniques to create scenario. We can think about the feature. We can break that feature into positive and negative scenarios. We can identify all the possible varieties which need to be tested, right? What are the different ways in which the error scenarios or negative scenarios can be checked? And then we don't need to write a detailed step by step test case here. We need to ensure that we are checking for these three data. We want to check for these expected results, and we need to check for all these invalid scenarios. So minimum documentation with highest, maximum kind of efficiency is always recommended in Agile. We need not write detailed step by step test cases. Documentation, typically what we can do is we can do persona analysis. Who is the user? What are his characteristics? This user is a senior citizen who is going to use this kind of application. So are we giving a good font which he can understand? Are we implementing correct error and messages, feedback messages? What that user does, why he is doing that, how he should get feedback if he does something right or wrong. So these kind of persona analysis can be done, that can be documented. That will help us to create better test cases. Acceptance criteria can be created for the user stories, right? In the given when then format. Given something happens, given a precondition, when some event occurs, then what should be the output? These acceptance criteria can help us to create scenarios based on the acceptance criteria. Okay, so we can create the acceptance criteria and then create scenarios, positive, negative, boundary scenarios, scenarios for different user personas, business rules, validations, backend processes, compatibility. So we will have to create all the scenarios. We need to ensure coverage. We don't need to go into the details of step by step documentation, but we should not miss anything in testing, right? Defect reports, yes, it is very important document that we need to generate. Defect tracking needs to be done from identification to closure. We need to validate the definition of done. When we can say that this user story is done, right? And for that, that DOD needs to be identified. So the documentation will be little different than from the conventional project. It is always going to be lightweight documentation, right? We can track our work by checking, have we achieved the coverage? How many lines of code are tested, right? How many functions are tested? How many modules are tested? How many user screens are tested? What is the rate, defect escape rate? How many defects were identified by the user during the demonstration or acceptance testing? Out of 100 total defects, if 20 defects are found by users, that means 20 defects have escaped from our hands. How can we reduce that? What is the density of defects? How many defects we found per kilo line of code? What is our velocity? How much work we are doing per sprint? What is the cycle time to complete one round of testing? What is the turnaround time for defect? Now, this is important because if the developers are not responding, they are not fixing the defects on time, it will create lot of burden on us. So it is better to track this metric as well, right? And how many retrospective actions we are implementing for continuous improvement. So such kind of work we can track. Now to become a good tester, we are coming towards the end of our webinar here. I need to be excellent in testing skills, no doubt about that. I should be able to understand the overall product vision, the users, what kind of testing is required, how I can do unit testing, how I can implement multiple design techniques, how I can think for defects, right? Automation skills are kind of mandatory if I want to work in Agile, right? Using API, UI, database. Technical skills also are required because sometimes we are continuously working in collaboration with developers. So we need to understand what they are talking, right? Sometimes we need to execute unit test cases. We need to understand what they are tracking. We need to do a lot of configurations in tools. So technical skills are also kind of mandatory. But apart from that, the Agile mindset is what we need to work on, right? Am I participatory? There is nobody who is going to give me work. I need to ask 100 questions. I need to ask and get more and more clarity about requirements. I cannot tell developer that why you have not implemented this, why did not I tell this earlier. If I can think of it, I should be contributing. I should be engaging myself actively. I should be responsive and accommodating. That those mindsets, how I can reprioritize my work. Okay, fine, there is a failure, I cannot go ahead, how I can reprioritize. New build has immediately come within 2 hours, how I can respond to that, how quickly I can take a decision about what data I should test on priority. So those kind of agile mindsets are more important for us to become a good tester. Are there any certifications? Yes, there is an ISTQB Agile Extension certification which we can do, which gives us better understanding about Agile practices, right? There is, but for that, obviously, ISTQB Foundation is mandatory. There is ISTQB Agile Technical Tester because in Agile, we have to be good in technical testing, right? So that certification also is available. There are some other institutes which provide some specific certifications like IC Agile, which gives agile testing professional certification. So that way, the certifications also will help us to, because as I told you, suppose you go for any Scrum certification, Scrum does not have anything specific to testing, right? So there are, now ISTQB has come up with all these agile certifications which give more focus on testing part of it. So that is all about this testing in agile environment. Thank you so much for your patient listening. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Pradnya, actually,
Yes,
you mentioned like two set of testers should be present in the team. One is with the development team, and one is dedicated to testing. So
right, right,
most of the organization, what they will do is concentrating on only one dedicated testing team, not involving into development. But they will make use of the testers involved during the development calls or requirement calls. So
right.
they will mainly look for the cost cutting. So this is one of the concept I got to know, like involving one set of like a tester into the development team. That is
Right,
informative.
right. So that, continuously they are engaging and we are having total clarity about the requirements and we can contribute. So that's
Yeah.
why, if we have 5 people in testing team, at least let 2 people be part of sitting with the development team and involved in the small story testing, which is only in that iteration. Outside that iteration and at a higher level testing can be done, by the another team, and the cadence of development team and testing team can be little different, because
Yeah.
development team may have 2 weeks of iteration and then the later 2 weeks will be the testing team's iteration. That also is possible. But then what we are doing post facto kind of testing. So it's better to do some testing within that iteration itself. That's why, thanks, Vani, for sharing your experience.
Yes, Pradnya, it was like I like this concept actually involving one of the tester in the dev team. It is a good point.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Himanshu, I can see your question. Any contractual agreement SOW where customer has agreed to develop a complex product completely with agile ways of working. Yes, actually, see, sometimes what happens when there is a requirement that comes from the customer, right? At the stage of proposal, typically when we are proposing our solution approach, that time we will typically suggest that whether it's a good way of doing agile in this project or not. Now, see, agile may not be the solution for all projects. Typically, if you look, let me just see if I can quickly pull one, simple. Just give me a moment, okay? I will show you. Just give me a second. I will just show you. Typically, what happens is every project is not actually suitable for agile development, right? So let me just show you this slide. This is from PMI, okay, Project Management Institute, and where they are talking about where the agile is, more suitable. So you can see here what they are saying here is this is from PMI, okay, Agile Practice Guide. If your technology is known and if your requirements are pretty certain, no? All the requirements are already clear and documented, then there may not be agile, that becomes a simple project, right? If your technology what you want to use and is not at all clear, what you want to develop is not at all clear, that becomes a chaotic kind of project, right? But there is a certain uncertainty in technology, there is certain uncertainty in requirements, right? Those are the complicated and complex kind of projects where definitely agile will help in a better way, right? So whenever we are proposing at for this stage, we can tell customer that look, this is where we are. Our project is not simple or not a chaotic one. We are working in this complicated or complex zone, and that's why delivering in an agile way will always help. So from that perspective, at that level itself, we can have that contractual agreement with the customer to set this expectation that this is why it is going to give us value. So what is the value of agile that we can propose at the time of our SOW creation, and then we will get it, agreed by the customer, and obviously we will need more buy-in from the customer for making them present in our weekly calls or having sprint and review meetings. So those agreements need to be made. Hope it answers your question, Himanshu.
Yeah. So, Pradny, thanks for clarifying. What I was trying to also understand is that whenever we sign up for a SOW with a customer for a requirement or for a project, generally what we see as per the definition of the project is that there is a start date and there is an end date. It could be a T&M model or it could be a fixed price. And
Perfect.
people, the customer generally used to pay in a fixed price model with milestones, right?
Right.
Now, when the milestones are decided at the very start, even when the project work has not started at the proposal or at the SOW end, right? How do we
Correct.
know that the project is going to be run in an agile mode? And if at all the limitations or the agility which is there in the agile mode of working, for example, limited lightweight documentation, not a very detailed blueprint design document.
Right.
How do people actually, or how do customer basically sign up for all these things
Right.
contractually?
Okay. Okay. So let me just talk about that little bit. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Typically at project, now this is more of a project management related question. So what we know is, in the project management, we know the triangle of project management where there is a scope, where there is a schedule or time, and when there is a cost, right? Typically, typically, we will not follow agile if the scope is clear. But agile practices we can propose. What I would say is, as you said, that there is a timeline and cost, they are fixed, right? If timeline and cost they are fixed, what is the variable? Variable is only scope. So when we are deciding about the timeline and cost, that okay, we need to deliver this project in this much time and with this much budget because it's a fixed price, then what variable is there in our hand is only scope. And this scope will drive the changes in the scope, will drive our agile practices. So we need to decide on the prioritization. Okay, within this milestone, from the perspective of agile development, which are the most valuable deliverables to the customer, and how we can plan our agile iterations accordingly. And then we will need to have the customer in sync with us, that okay, based on the scope perspective, the low priority or the low value requirements may not be achieved with this fixed point, fixed, fixed price, and that time bound, milestone bound delivery. So either we will have fixed scope or we will have fixed timeline and cost. All three fixing, then it's not really way of agile. So if we have a limited time and limited budget, within that the scope becomes only one variable, and we will have to prioritize the scope to give more value to the customer. So that understanding can be achieved during the initial contracts and SOW phases.
Yeah, I think the only challenge which I foresee with the experience that we have during pre-sales and in the hurry of getting the project or in the hurry of getting the business from the customer. Generally, during the pre-sales, most of the sales people, and I do not blame any individual or any specific profile, but project
Of course.
managers can also be salespeople.
True,
They
true.
tend to actually forget these nuances, that because if the scope is a variable factor and it has not been accounted for during the pre-sales, it leads to a lot of problems at the very late stage.
Perfect, perfect, perfect. So I think that awareness development in the entire team, because that is what we are calling as business agility, right? So agility cannot be there in only development team. Agility needs to be there at every level of business that we are working in, and that's why it is very important to make that awareness also within the teams, that yes, this is, if you are keeping time and cost as fixed, the scope is going to be a variable.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Thank you.
True, true, Himanshu. But I do, understand, and I do, agree to what happens on the ground. Definitely.
Thank you, Pradnya.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ma. Is there any other question anyone wants to ask?
Just
Okay.
one query, especially on the testing side.
हाँ
Uh,
हिमांशु.
uh, Pradnya, are there any specific tools for testing that you can suggest, let's say, to build the project development work around SAP?
Um, Actually, so you mean SAP testing, right?
Yes.
Uh, Means, see, recently I have seen Tosca is having a lot of promises in SAP testing area. And there are a couple of other tools also which are mainly built, which are having a lot of support to the, SAP objects and SAP UI.
Okay. Right.
Qualicia also, I heard that they are also having dedicated SAP. But this is from my knowledge perspective. There will be many others, but they have separate SAP kind of. Tosca is separate SAP, as a technology that they are supporting, or domain that they are supporting. So that quickly came to my mind.
So these tools will actually support the Z transaction codes developed in ABAP in an automated way.
That's what in automation, yes, they help in automation. That's what I have seen or heard. Means I have seen some things there implemented.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Somebody video is on. If you are not made it intentionally. Okay. Okay, thank you so much. And uh, thanks for your participation. Please complete your feedback before you quit.
Thank you, Pradnya. Thank you,
Thanks and
Thanks,
Pradnya,
bye.
for the wonderful session.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And thank you, Pradanya, for such a great session.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah.